tous, good evening and good morning. Good evening, everybody here in France or in Europe, and good morning to Rob. Robert Jack is a senior lecturer at Macquarie University in Australia. He's going to talk to us about the modularity of product/service offering and the relationship with entry modes. First of all, I want to thank him for participating into this into our monthly webinar. It's the first time we welcome somebody from Australia, probably also because it's the first time somebody accepts to wake up or to start a webinar at 4 a.m. in the morning. So I really want to give a big cheer to Robert, because it's a very early start for the day. Starting with a webinar at 4 a.m. Congratulations. And it's very interesting, and I think maybe Robert, you can elaborate on this, because international business is an important. I mean, Australia is important in international business academic production. There's always been a lot of researchers over there in international business. And for those who listen here who are based in Europe, you can imagine maybe that you have to imagine that when you're an Australian firm and you want to export, your neighbors, well, they're not the most, similar countries to yours. I mean, when we export from France, we have many neighbor countries that are quite similar and close. When you start from Australia and you want to go overseas, well, as Robert was saying, you really have to go overseas, and the countries that are around you don't really completely resemble you. The neighbor countries, of course, are New Zealand, but also Indonesia, which is a very different country from Australia. An interesting market, though, but difficult to catch when you have an Australian background. So I think it's very interesting to have this input from Australia, especially on this topic which is very important for all firms. What do you sell and how you sell it? But first, what do you sell? You sell it the same way? Do you organize your product and service offering in the same way? Very often companies combine product and service offering, but can they deliver both when they go overseas, or do they have to partner up to deliver both? Do they have to establish? So there goes the entry mode dilemma, which is, okay, what do I want to offer? What can I offer, and how can I offer and deliver it in a way that is sustainable, profitable, and efficient for the client? And that's, I think, is exactly what Robert is going to tell us about. So I give you the floor, Robert. So I think you have a presentation that you're going to share.
Yes.
Probably something like 30-40 minutes of presentation. I don't know how you feel. It's likely to last, but not more than 40 minutes if possible.
Yep.
And then we go for question time. In the meantime, people can share their remarks in the chats inside Teams here. I will pick them up at the end of the session, and we'll try to do a question time after Robert's presentation. The floor is yours, Robert. To you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here presenting today, and thanks for the opportunity to do that. I'll just share my screen, if that's okay, and I'm hoping that everyone can see that clearly. It might take a couple of minutes for it to, a little while to come up, but I take it you can all see that. I'm assuming yes. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about today. As I was chatting just briefly before we started, a lot of what I'm presenting today is actually drawn originally from some of the work I did in my doctorate, which was a few years ago. And I've always had an interest in looking at the service industry, the service sector, and how that internationalizes. It always has interesting challenges, but it grew out of an idea that, having met with many owners, founders of small businesses, that it was very interesting to hear the way they talked about their products. As researchers, there tends to be a bit of a view that there are service firms, there are manufacturing firms, and that's about it. But the reality is that many products have different levels, different combinations of individual product characteristics. And when firms that produce these types of products internationalize, they have to think very differently about the way they internationalize and how they internationalize and what component of the product they're internationalizing. So this is the bit of the backdrop to this. So I'm just doing here an acknowledgement of country. I'm actually at my university campus today. And so I'm just going to do a quick welcome to the traditional owners of Macquarie University land. That is the Wallumegaddagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture the land since Dreamtime. And we pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So just a little bit about me. This is very brief. I'm currently at Macquarie University Business School, which is in Sydney, in Australia. I'm originally from Melbourne. My PhD was done within international business, within roughly this area of international business at Monash University in 2007. I've been at Macquarie University Business School since 2009, not long after I graduated. So this was my first academic appointment. And one of the current roles I have is that I'm course director for our Master of Management program. Now, I thought it might be good to set the scene a little bit. This is a quote from one of the case study firms that I'm presenting tonight. And this is a firm that actually produces medical instruments. Now, it has a fairly significant export market. It's based in Melbourne. And this is, I think, very indicative of how many managers in this firm view their product. So you can see the quote here. I won't read it out. I've just highlighted what they regard as the components of their product. So the start of their product process is this very intensive interaction with a client who is obviously wanting the firm to design something specific for them. Once that is done, there is the implementation, the product development. You might call it the manufacturing of the product. And then there's a third component where the product is handed over. It has to be maintained. It has to be serviced. There's a lot of interaction again. And as the CEO said, when you look at that product breakdown, and I'm just summarise that a little bit, it is a summary, is the challenge that they have is how are you going to do all this overseas? So to some extent, what we might call the manufacturing component is the middle bit. This is where they actually make the product. But as the CEO was at pains to point out, in some ways, that's the easy bit. The first element is trying to find out what the client wants. It's very interactive. They have to interact. And once the product is actually produced to the client's specification, it has to be delivered. It has to be tested. It actually has to be then serviced and maintained over a long period of time. And that's always done by the firm. So it's very interactive again. So even though this firm might perhaps be classified within government agencies as a manufacturer, you can see that it doesn't actually see itself like that. Now, this is not all that unusual from the point of view of how many CEOs will define what they do. But the big challenge that they've got is how do they do this internationally? How do you do these three very distinct elements over a period of time in international markets, particularly, as was said at the start, in a market like Australia, which is isolated? So what I'm talking about today is very much focused around this idea of product modularity. And this is I suppose you could call it a bit of an engineering concept, which has been applied in different ways to try and have an understanding about how products can be decomposed or developed into components to understand their use. And what we're trying to do with this particular bit of analysis is try and apply this to how firms then use modularity in a way of trying to make it more logical for them to internationalize. Now, many of them have fairly complex products, and so they tend to think of their product as one that has a number of components. That's not unusual in any particular way. But what is unusual is then trying to think about the way, well, how do we do this overseas? How do we interact with the client? What do we have to do in the actual market? What can we do in the home market? Do we have to travel back and forth over a period of time? Do we have the resources to do that? These are all some of the key things that these firms actually do. What I'm presenting today is very, very much focused on SMEs. It's an overview of 5 SMEs, quite diverse in terms of their product elements. Some of them have manufacturing components, some of them are pure service firms, but even service firms do tend to think of their service product in this way. So the basics around product modularity is that, you know, products can be thought about in terms of components or sub-assemblies. And this is not necessarily talking about business functions, it's really talking about the product and how it actually relates to the development of the product itself. And what are the implications of this for the organization of the firm? So we tend to see very much product modularity emphasized in the design of organizations, around departments, etc., who does what in relation to the development of the product. But we don't really think about it necessarily from the point of view of internationalization. Now, product modularity can, of course, the most common example of it is where you tend to get goods and services blended together. Okay, so many products, whether they're a good or a service, have additional service components embedded in them. Some of them require customized design and are then supported by service-related activities such as installation, guarantees, commissioning, after-sale support. You saw those 2 elements very much evident in that first large quote that I presented at the beginning. So we tend to talk about goods and service combinations as being the outcome of this overview of product modularity. Now, it's not just goods and services, even service products can sometimes be broken down into individual components. So the good service combination is a relatively easily understood concept from this point of view. But there is also many examples of where service firms, consulting firms also have the idea of breaking their service product down into different components that might require different elements of service delivery. So this is the idea or the outcome of product modularity around this idea of embedded services. Now, if you have an understanding of services and what they're like, we can understand that services are very, very unique and very distinctive. And there is a term that is used to describe services. It's probably derived more from marketing, which is about separability. So where you have a service or a product that is separable, it can be produced, made separate from the client. Okay, so a manufactured good is largely like that, and certain service products, such as, you know, online education as a very simple example, can also be done like that. But also, the nature of services is that they're largely inseparable. They're interactive. You have to interact with the client. Now, where this becomes somewhat complex in terms of delivery is where you have these 2 components coming together into a single product offering. So where you have separable and inseparable components within a single product offering. So that means that goods can be supported by inseparable services, but it also means service product can actually have separable and inseparable components contained in them. And at the same time, even if you're talking about interaction with a client, it can sometimes be quite distinctive. We tend to think of interaction in a rather one-dimensional way. But as this nice little quote says, interaction can vary in length. It can be continuous. It can be interrupted by different time periods. It can take place at the beginning of the process, or it can take place at the end of the process. So we've got a lot of complexity around here, around the idea of how firms view their products, the concept of modularity, breaking them down into individual components, understanding perhaps that some of these components can be good related, some of them can be service related. And then within the services, you've got this added complexity around the nature of how the service is developed or how it is delivered. Now, this is jumping ahead a bit, but this is looking at how this is being treated in terms of internationalisation. So what the literature tells us and what an enormous amount of research tells us is that when you have an inseparable product activity, a service activity that requires you to actually directly interact with your client, it implies that the firm may have to be directly in the market to do that. It has to be present in the market. Now, traditionally, the way that this has been done is that you might do it through investment. You might set up offices, sales offices, marketing offices, etc., in the client, staff them with perhaps your own people or local people, and deliver your service activity in that way. So it's a form of direct investment. Other firms can actually think about doing it through contractual agreements with local partners in international markets, where there's a recognition that perhaps they might not have the resources to do it, they might not have the expertise to do it, so therefore they'll contract with a local partner who will do it on their behalf. There hasn't been much thought given to the idea of exporting inseparable services. But I've just done I know this is might seem a little bit academic in terms of its format, but this is where there has been some analysis of the idea of interactive or inseparable services actually being exported by relevant staff who have that expertise. So there has been some attempt at trying to develop terminology around doing this. And the ones I've highlighted in red are the ones that I'm specifically looking at. So transhuman exports is perhaps a rather unusual term to use, but it has been used in the literature. And you can see the descriptions that are listed there. What I'm going to use in terms of the analysis tonight is this idea of embodied people exporting, where again, it's a way that a service activity that requires interaction between the firm and a client or a customer can be delivered through a form of exporting. Now, again, from the literature, this has not really been analysed a huge amount. So this is where we're coming from in terms of looking at, again, this product breakdown, firms looking at their product from the point of view modality, breaking it down, looking at, in most cases, the service component, what's the nature of the service, the good component, how do I have to interact with my client to deliver this product package, how am I going to do it internationally, can I export it? Okay, and is there a way of exporting an inseparable or interactive activity? Well, yes, there is. Okay. So this is where you can have this component of an investment option for the delivery of inseparable interactive service activities, a contractual arrangement that is there, but also perhaps there is an exporting option. Now, this will become a little bit more obvious when I go through the data, where you can see how this works. Okay, so what I'm presenting today is a case study of 5 Australian small to medium-sized businesses. They would be largely classified as operating in business-to-business markets. And the aim of the research was to really look at, firstly, how do these firms define their products? Do they adopt the idea of product modality when they define their products? And does this breakdown or definition of their product, is it factored into the way that they internationalize? Now, as many of you will be aware, because I know many of you are business owners, SMEs are very, very popular, particularly in Australia, and I'm sure it's no different in France, as a data set for this type of research. Many SMEs, they don't have an abundance of financial and human capital resources. So they tend to be, however, because they lack those resources, more creative in the way that they think about things, the way that they think about their product, and perhaps also the way that they think about how that product can actually be internationalized. So I'm keeping the firms confidential, which I probably don't have to do because they're fairly small and they're not that well known. But I've just done a small overview here of what they are. They're fairly diverse in terms of what they do. So the first three firms could be termed manufacturers, although, as I'll explain in a moment, they don't like using that term as a classification. But they are involved in the development or the production of a tangible product. The last two firms, D&E, are essentially classified as service firms. So again, their final product is very, very different. But you can see here, and I've just briefly listed these are the additional activities that are designed to support their key products. Design, maintenance, sales process, consultation, implementation, training, all additional service activities that are essential to the development of these particular key products. So I'm just going to go through these in a little bit of detail just to explain their background. First, from the point of view of, okay, in terms of how they view their products. Now, this is what came up when we were asking the key managerial staff about the definition of their products. And not surprisingly, they didn't define it from a singular perspective. They didn't say, oh, we're a service provider. They didn't say we're a manufacturer. These are the terms that they were using. We're a solution provider. We develop an idea to market. We build products for our client success. We're about building partnerships. Now, obviously, all of these have a marketing function, a value creating function, but obviously they imply that it's a bundle of activities that these firms do. Okay, so they're not defining what they do in a singular way. It inquires, it inquires, a number of key activities that they're doing. Okay, so the first firm that we're going to look at very briefly is a very interesting firm. This is a firm that's based in Newcastle, in New South Wales, which is about 2 hours drive from Sydney. And it is involved with the refurbishment of rolling stock, railway rolling stock. So it's not really a manufacturer. It's taking an existing product and essentially refurbishing it, refurbishing trains, etc., that can increase their lifespan. So their particular classification of supporting services is, of course, the design and the maintenance of their refurbishment activity. And what I've done here is try to get an idea about the nature of these service activities. Are they interactive? How are they delivered? And would they define them as being separable or inseparable? Okay, so you can see here with most of this activity, it requires interaction. It's actually done through perhaps a combination of interaction directly between the firm and the client. It's sometimes done through electronic transmission, as it's sometimes called. And so again, you can see very separable and always an ongoing activity. This one's a bit more complex. This is a very interesting firm. This produces industrial kilns. It has a very interesting export market. It's a family operated firm set up by two brothers. And you can see that in support of that product, there's a significant amount of service activity that is required in the development of the product, and then at the end, the installation, the commissioning, the service support, ongoing consulting. You can see that a lot of this has some differences in terms of how long this activity takes place. Is it ongoing? Is it one-off, etc.? Is it interactive? Most of this is interactive. Most of this is actually done or classified as inseparable, meaning the firm has to interact with the clients. It has to go to the clients to do this particular activity. The third one, is the one that I quoted from at the beginning of the presentation. So again, a very sophisticated product, tangible product, medical instruments, which require additional service activities around design, around development, around delivery, and around after-sales support. And again, you're seeing here, the length of these activities. Are they ongoing? Do they happen in restricted time periods? Are they project specific? Do they require interaction? Can they be delivered online? Are they separable and inseparable? Now, what I'm trying to do here is to try and sort of build up an idea about not only how the products are broken down, but how the delivery of these individual components are actually defined. And what we'll be looking at in a moment is, of course, what are the implications of this for the purposes of their international growth? Now, the last two firms are essentially service firms. Again, they wouldn't use that rather bland classification, but this particular firm is a specialized consulting firm that provides a lot of infrastructure consulting to governments, and particularly to governments in some key emerging markets. So they are very much around the idea of specialized consulting. So beyond that, they have ongoing consulting services. They have training in relation to the advice that they provide and what the implications might be for that. And you can see here that, again, their activities are very interactive, very inseparable, but you can see here they are quite defined in terms of the length of the activity. Okay, so they're quite short span. None of their particular service activity is an ongoing or classified as ongoing. Okay, so it could be as little as a month. It could be perhaps up to 2 to 3 months, 2 to 6 months, sorry. And the final firm, again, would be classified in the service domain. It's software upgrade and installation. And you can see, again, a number of significant additional service activities that they define. Again, they're quite specific about the length of these activities and also quite specific about the frequency of them and how interactive they are and whether they're separable and inseparable. Okay, now what you're seeing here is, of course, is trying to get an idea about whether the timing of these activities, whether they're short term or whether they're longer term, can actually have an impact on how these firms think about their international delivery. So if you think about it, if you're looking at a service activity that is ongoing, that requires continuous interaction, that may justify an ongoing presence in the market. It may determine that the firm thinks the only way we're going to do this successfully is that we establish operations there and deliver this service. But where you've got a length of activity that could be quite brief, do you need to do that? And this is where you get the option perhaps of doing it through a specialized form of exporting. Okay, so what does this mean? The challenge for firms. For many of these firms, the challenge with their internationalization is not so much their main product, which in some cases is, whether it's a good or a service, can actually be manufactured or made or developed or produced quite easily at home. It's what surrounds that final product at the start, before it's actually made, and at the end, after it's made, that produces the complexity. Okay, so yes, they can export their final product, but how do they provide that full product package essential to the pre-production of the product and the post-production of the product? And although the product might be separable, meaning it could be a good, it could be a report, okay, which is also classified as separable, a document, a specialized document that's handed over to the client. How are you able to interact with the client to provide the service elements essential for the development and the use of that product? So this is where you start to get the analysis of modularity coming into play in terms of thinking, breaking down the product and looking at how these individual product components need to be internationalized. Now, I apologize, I hope you can see this quite clearly, but what I'm doing here is simply listing down the key product components, looking at the key markets where these firms actually currently are, and looking at the modes or the methods that they use to deliver their product. Okay, so you can see here firstly that you're not getting a huge abundance of markets here. Okay, so most of the firms, Hong Kong, Malaysia, China, West Coast of the USA, that's mainly California, Vietnam and the Gulf states, New Zealand and Malaysia, not huge, but these are small firms. Okay, they're not large players. So their ability to internationalize quickly is limited, but their ability to internationalize with this product complexity that they have is also limited at this stage of their development. Okay, so if you look at the modes, you can see here that what they're using is a number of different entry modes. So some of them are entering these markets, it's true, with some form of production FDI. Okay, but that's just related to, in many cases, their main product. A lot of the supporting services that are essential to that product are largely provided from head office. And that can be done in two ways. It can be done, of course, through electronic transmission or online delivery, but it also needs to be done through the idea of having staff travel into those markets and provide this expertise. And this could be done very briefly, but it could be done over a longer period of time. So it could be sending someone to an overseas market and they might be there for 2 weeks up to a month delivering that service component. This is what we're calling embodied people exporting. It's not fly in and fly out. I'll talk about that just very briefly at the end. This is not regarded by the firms as a fly in, fly out scenario, which they tend to sort of be more related to sales activities, client relationships, etc. This is very much focused on the delivery of a key component of their product by their specialized staff. So what you're seeing is, you can see by the indication of the modes that you start to get some relationship between the breakdown of the products and the breakdown of the way that they actually deliver these products in international markets. Okay, so to some extent, as I've mentioned, certainly there is a tremendous reliance on the cross-border transfer of key personnel. Many of the inseparable services that they have identified have predetermined timeframes. So yes, the services are inseparable. They have to be delivered directly to the client, but it's possible that this interaction has a start and a stop. It's not ongoing, it's not continuous. So it's possible to do that by sending the key people there and actually having a fair amount of flexibility around this. So this is where we're talking about embodied people exporting, okay, where information is carried from the home to the host market and delivered, essentially delivered in the same way that exporting does, to the client. So, as we've seen, inseparable services such as installation, commissioning, various forms of after-sales service, all have predetermined timeframes for completion. The service component is of a short-term nature, but the response time is critical. Now, this is the key element in relation to their international strategy. Okay, so this puts it in a nice little quote. This is from company C. And I think it's quite evident, although I'll read it out. For example, the work we do can start on the 1st of August, finish on the 1st of January. And at that point, when we finish, we do hand something over to the client, who then leaves with it and may never come back to us. In that sense, it is separable. But within that 6-month period, we must work together intimately. So it's very intimate or very interactive, but it's over a defined time period. Now, this is very important because it's this type of analysis that determines the way that these firms will internationalize with this product complexity, and in particular, the choice of markets. Now, this is evident in this slide. So again, this is an interesting observation. If we're looking at markets, at other markets, then it would be anywhere I could get on a plane and be with the client within 16 hours. Anything longer would be unmanageable. And this is why these firms are essentially internationalized into markets that, from an Australian perspective, are relatively close to Australia, which means that their interaction with the client can actually be within a reasonable time frame. Now, I know from a European perspective, 16 hours might sound ridiculously long, but from an Australian perspective, that's a short amount of time. For us, a 16-hour flight, as an example, or let's say an 8 or 9 hour flight, is actually quite short from our perspective. So this is what these firms have to think about. They have to think about that many of these service activities, particularly the after sales service support, has to be done by them. But it also means that if they're a client who runs a business, if their particular product that they've sold to the client doesn't work or stops, their client's business stops. And therefore, they have to guarantee the client, look, I know I'm far away, I know I'm in Sydney, I know I'm in Melbourne, but hey, if you contact me, I can be there within just over half a day. Okay. And this is the way that they're thinking. So what we're seeing is this sort of flow-on effect from understanding the breakdown of their product, understanding what components of the product is, let's say, a service, what component is a good, what is the nature of the service, does it have to be interactive? If it has to be interactive, is it ongoing, is it continuous, is it one-off? And therefore, how can we deliver this internationally? Do we have to do it within a region or can we go broader? What they're doing is that they're doing it within a very narrow region because of this idea of being able to engage with the client quickly. And this is the last slide. So I think there are some very, very interesting implications from this. Now, again, a lot of it I'm talking about from an Australian perspective. So some of the ideas of distance and all that and flight times might seem a little bit unusual from a European perspective, but I think it still has relevance. So first of all, we've got this link between the idea of modality, the idea of product breakdowns, and linking that to entry mode choice. The end result of that is that you find that many of these firms have actually multiple modes. So they're not just investing, they're investing part of their product. They're also exporting part of their product. They're also trying to find ways to deliver their product online. So they're doing combination of modes, okay, which is very challenging for SMEs because they lack resources to do this. Hence, they don't expose themselves initially at this stage in their growth to a large variety of markets. And I'm putting just the question here. I mean, I've had this asked before, is this just another way of fly in, fly out? You know, is this just simply a way of flying, fly out? Well, these firms are saying, no, it's not. Fly in, fly out for them is really when they might meet with the client for the first time. They might be wanting to build a relationship with the client. It's not about product delivery. That is something they see as quite separate. So when they send someone over there to carry out an emergency service, to deliver or install or commission the product that they've produced, to them, that is not fly in, fly out. That is an embodied export of a service activity that is essential to the product. And I hope you've enjoyed that. And that's where I'll leave it for the moment. And I'm happy to take questions. I'll stop sharing if that's okay. And I hope that was clear. I think you're mute.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, that was pretty clear. I think there's I wanted to understand what exactly you mean by embodied people exporting. It means like somebody flying out, staying for a long time and coming back, or something.
Yes, it's where, for argument's sake, it depends. It can be very short term. So for some of the consulting firms, that their stay in that country might be fairly lengthy. So for argument's sake, the consulting firm that does a lot of infrastructure consulting for governments, it recently had a contract that ran for about 2 or 3 years in Oman in the Middle East. And so one of their key people would go there for about a month at a time. He'd go over there for a month, interact, find out details, stay there, come back. 3 or 4 months later, he'd go over again. This is all part of building up the expertise that's required to develop their product. Now, that's what I'm terming embodied people exported. It's where staff are delivering a key component of the product specifically for that purpose. And these firms regard that as a form of service exporting.
Hey, well, thank you, Robert, for all these contributions and your very early starts in the day. I hope you will enjoy your day. I hope you enjoy your session. This session. I hope everybody was happy with the session. Thank you very much, and well, we look forward to seeing you again. I mean, if you come over to Europe, or you're more than happy to meet you when you fly in. And if you have more research in the future or from different topics in the coming years, we'll be more than happy to welcome you again.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. It was great. Thank you.
Take care, Robert.
Okay.